Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. CESPA is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. And this program is part of that effort. Now, given Israel's aerial attacks in Lebanon against Hezbollah targets, which began with the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, and Iran's missile attack on 3 military targets in Israel last Tuesday, the Middle East is headed for vertical escalation, which could become a spiral. Israel has also begun a shallow ground incursion in Lebanon along multiple axes, and the Israeli occupation forces have clashed with Hezbollah fighters on the ground. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that Israel will inflict a severe punishment on Iran. Israel's mentor and iron ally, the United States, has also spoken of severe consequences for Iran, and the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, told a press briefing that, and I quote, "There will be severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case." Israeli media reports say Israel is preparing a list of targets in Iran, which would likely include attacks on oil rigs and nuclear sites. According to some Israeli sources, the plan could also involve targeted assassinations of Iranian officials and leaders. During the vice presidential candidates debate, Trump's running mate J.D. Vance said that he would be okay with an attack on Iran. Meanwhile, Standard & Poor's Global has followed Moody's to downgrade Israel's credit rating. This is the second time this year. The cost of war for Israel so far has been estimated at $66 billion US, and the cost would continue to go up. To discuss where the situation is and where it is headed, I have with me Dr. Arman Mahmoudian. Dr. Mahmoodian is a research fellow at the USF Global and National Security Institute. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of South Florida's Judy Genshaft Honors College and teaches courses on Russia, the Middle East, and international security. Aman, good to have you on the program. I was actually watching you earlier on a BBC Persian program, which, of course, I could not understand. Well, I mean, I do have a little bit of understanding, but when the Persians start speaking Persian and the speed with which the sentences are formulated, obviously, it becomes difficult to follow that. But here's the thing. Let's start with what Iran's policy always has been since the revolution, and especially after the end of the Iran-Iraq war. We will continue to build our strength brick by brick. We will also like to have influence in the greater Middle East, but we will avoid a direct confrontation with the United States or with a stronger state, especially one allied with the United States. It now seems that Iran, first in April and now on Tuesday, its hand has been forced into seeking a direct confrontation. Do you believe that this is a major shift from the strategy of the indirect approach to now a direct confrontation?
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me start with this. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on board. I've been following your center and you for a while. It's a great honor to be here. You are doing a great job. And now back to the question. Well, Iran's foreign policy, generally speaking, Iran's strategy of governance has, when it comes to the Middle East, had three primary goals. The primary goal is always the survival of the regime.
Correct.
Islamic Republic is the survival of regimes, and it's not me or any other political analyst scientist saying it. It's Ayatollah Khomeini, the founding father. I want to quote unquote. He said, "The protection of the establishment, or as he said in Nizam, is the highest mandate, or quote unquote wajibat, meaning the mandate of mandates." So he says that in another place that if for the protection of the regime, you have to close mosques or Friday prayers, you got to do it. So survival of regime is the top of the hierarchy. The second and the third always place the same. They change their places, but they are the same. But they quite the same. The second one is the ejection of the United States from the Middle East. Iran wants US out of the region. And the third is the destruction or elimination or undermining the state of Israel. Again, the second and the third changes depending on the situation. As you very nicely put it, and I couldn't ever do that, at the very beginning of the establishment of the Islamic Republic, Iran decided to have others fight its battles with the United States and the Jewish state, the proxy groups. For that, in 1982 and 1983, they established the cornerstone of the Hezbollah. They sent the Muhammad Rasulullah division to Syria and the other to the Lebanon. Then they started assisting the Syrians, then the Iraqi Supreme Council, the Iraqi Battle Organization, and later, in 2000s, there was funding Hamas. So that was a ring of fire all around Israel, that others would buy assistance, direction, and funding of the Iran would fight. Among all of these, Hezbollah was a unique place. Because, the thing about the Hezbollah is not only Iran's proxy in the Lebanon. I think most people neglect to actually see Hezbollah's quite main role. Hezbollah is not Iran's only proxy to the Lebanon. Hezbollah is Iran's guy or second guy next to the IRGC in the Middle East. Look, in Syria, who the Iranians sent first? It was Hezbollah. In Iraq, after the invasion of the Iraq by the United States, Hezbollah immediately formed a division to go there to train. In Yemen, they are working. In Bahrain, Hezbollah was. So Hezbollah is part of a component of the Iran's greater strategy. It's not just a matter of the deterrence. It's actually a matter of advancing in strategy. I think what happened during the last week, which kind of make it very different from what happened in April and change everything, I admit it, is that in April, Iran wanted to send a symbolic message because they didn't have any other option. It was forced to do. Now, they feel that given to what happened to Hezbollah's high command in the last few weeks, specifically speaking, the elimination of the Nasrallah, which seems there were 12 other commanders with him. We have to wait on that a little bit. I think Iran feels that it needs to make a more direct approach in order to protect its main asset. Because for them, if Hezbollah falls, there might be a domino impact across the Middle East, not eliminating or removing Iranian influence, but undermining it. And that's where the shift comes.
Right. So I'm not much of a chess player, frankly, but they have this term, Zugzwang, where a player is in a dilemma. It has to make a move. It cannot but move, but the move is going to redound to its disadvantage. So that seems to be the issue here vis-a-vis Iran. If the primary objective is regime survival and sustenance, then it is obviously clashing in this situation with certain other strategic objectives. And you're right in the sense that Hezbollah is not a proxy per se, not like, for instance, the Iraqi militias or perhaps the Houthis. It did have its own agency because it was also part of Lebanese politics, but also the muscle, in a manner of speaking, that Iran called on to resolve issues. So therefore, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah's killing was obviously something very big. But here's the thing, and I want you to, because there's a lot of interest here and elsewhere also, about how the Israeli intelligence has been able to penetrate the IRGC counterintelligence also and the Hezbollah counterintelligence also. I mean, Ismail Hania's killing in the north of Tehran in a guest house run by IRGC is a very clear indication. And I also want just a supplementary question to this one. Why did Hezbollah not realize that these targeted assassinations mean that the Israelis have a real-time intelligence on the movement and whereabouts of Hezbollah and Iranian leaders?
Very good question. Very, very good question. And I appreciate it. I think a while ago, I wrote a piece for Stimson Center, which you guys cooperate with it too. It's on and off. About the intelligence failure in Iran. But it was mostly on Iran. But I'm going to broaden it up on both Iran and Hezbollah. You know, in intelligence, the lay word that they use for the spies is a mole.
Yeah.
And in order to have a mole, you need to find a hole, actually, which means a vacuum. Yeah. In both Iran and Hezbollah, I think, generally speaking, their rival intelligence services find holes or windows of opportunity in specific timelines. In Iran, it was mostly speaking after the Green Movement.
Okay.
2009, 2010. And the reason behind that was that because the Green Movement wasn't the clash between government and average Joey or average Ali on Iran's street. It was a clash between government and part of the population who were leading by reformists like Mir Hossein Mousavi, Karoui. They were part of the establishment. They were big guys. And the thing is, ironically, Iran's intelligence service, Iran's intelligence community, the Ministry of Intelligence, we actually been funded and established by today's reformists. Saeed Hajjarian, which conservatives actually tried to assassinate him in the late 90s, and not conservatives, radicals who were affiliated with the Conservative Party, is the founding father of the intelligence community of Iran. He wrote basically the principle and the chapter of it. So what happened there is in 2009, 2010, in my view, there was a purge within the Iranian intelligence community. So they decided to kind of kick out, cleanse the intelligence community from whoever had an alignment with the reformists. That was the first thing. So they kind of thinned their, let's say that officers will trade, and they had to recruit instead of them. The second thing was that not only they did the purge, they had to focus on the Green Movement itself. So they didn't really got the chance to settle in the new format. They had an existential threat on the street. And the third thing that happened, in order to actually rectify this problem, they came up with a remedy, which in my view is worse. So they established or permuted IRGC's interior or internal intelligence organization to actually intelligence organization. Well, the thing is that all of the countries have various intelligence community. But for instance, in the United States, we have dozens of them. But each have its own responsibility. FBI does counterintelligence, NSA SIGINT, and CIA foreign espionage. Their duty is very clearly outlined. They don't have conflict of interest. In Iran, they got the idea that they need to have various intelligence community, but they didn't get the idea that they have to have a clear division of labor. The IRGC's intelligence organization, so as Monetel support, a sense of duty and responsibility has an almost total overlap with the Ministry of Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And it had caused a great deal of rivalry. So that's Iran's problem. And I think that's when the window came on. And now we should keep in mind, the things in Iran just got worse. Iran went through a various generation of the protests, economic hardship. All of this gave more incentive to the people to be less loyal to the establishment. Now, about the case of Hezbollah, I think for Hezbollah, the window was in 2013 and 14, when they decided to go to the Syria. So a couple of things happened there. First of all, they exposed themselves. They exposed their high command. Second of all, they started losing people over there, which they had to recruit, replace, and they couldn't recruit and replace them because the older generation were from the very tribal venting process. So there was a kind of family observation on each other. So they had to be out of it. The third thing, that they were in a close relation with those they couldn't counterintelligence-wise supervise, meaning they were in close relation with IRGC, which Mossad has shown itself in the last 3 years prior to that to have infiltrated or penetrated. They were close relationship with the Syrian army, which we both know it was shrinking. You never could say that which officer was loyal because they kept the testing. And they were close in a relationship with Russians, which they have a great deal of relations with the Israelis, and generally speaking, the communities are very interactive. I think that's the part that Israelis found an opportunity to start penetrating. And above all of this, one thing that Iran and Hezbollah always lack, Iranian and Iran, and all of its proxy vis-a-vis, they don't have an independent supply chain. What does it mean? Like if tomorrow you want to get a smartphone for a militia, any phone, a TV, a laptop, you can't rely on domestic products. You need to buy it. Pagers show the impact of it. And now regarding the last part of the question, how Hezbollah made this miscalculation? I think after the pagers, what happened within the Hezbollah is that they shut down their use of electronic telecommunication equipment, because that was their understanding that Mossad infiltrated it. And I believe they went back to the traditional use of the communication as Hamas used to do it prior to October, relying on a human messenger, drop boxes. Very shortly, they shifted it. That gave them probably a sense of confidence that they shouldn't have. Because that meeting, it didn't make any sense. I mean, you're in almost midst of war, and now you have your high command all together, knowing that you do not have an aerial defense capability. I mean, it seems that they were confident that they relied on a new means of communication, which either wasn't secure or there was already a mole within Hezbollah's high command or Iranians who've been in touch with them closely.
Precisely, because, you take care of SIGINT, and, you don't realize that Israelis are also past masters at HUMINT.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt, as a minor student of, this area of interest, in a manner of speaking, I have no doubt that there's physical penetration within the IRGC also and within Hezbollah also. But I think your explanation with reference to how Hezbollah exposed itself when it went to Syria, and how they had to replenish, recruit people who probably could not be vetted in the same rigorous way that others had been, makes eminent sense with reference to Now to the point of Israel's retaliation. In April, Biden said that he had told Netanyahu that, take the win and no need to retaliate. This time, the situation is different. If an attack comes on Iran, oil rigs or nuclear facilities, or as some of the sources are saying, a covert assassination campaign of Iranian officials and leaders, what would be Iran's options? It does not have an air force that can contend with the Israeli Air Force. The S-300 is not really a very reliable A2AD system. And obviously, its stock of missiles is not unlimited. So how would Iran fare in case of an Israeli attack, and what could Iran's possible response be?
I think Iran doesn't have an absolute tool to use, a winning card. Iran doesn't have that at this moment, but has a hybrid or a complex layer of cards that can use to increase the cost vastly for the Israelis. Israel and Iran both have a main advantage, which the other doesn't. The advantage that Israeli has is a very sophisticated, sufficient, advanced air force, both in terms of conventional and unconventional. So Israelis can penetrate Iran's aerospace, and there's no doubt about that. The advantage what Iran has and Israel doesn't have, it's territorial size, which might sound cliche, but why I'm saying this is that for Israel, it's going to be hard, given to the distance, to have under the country of Iran as a whole system under the attack, constant attack. They just don't have that capability. And Iran is a large country. You have to keep in mind there's many logistic things, air fueling and all. On the contrary, Iran does have this advantage. To have the country of the Israel, specifically the northern part, the Jerusalem to the Haifa. That's the main part of it. When you go to the south, it's Eilat and a couple of others,
Yeah.
Iran has the capability to have the main part of the Israel under the fire. Well, one might make a case that, well, they wouldn't get anywhere. They wouldn't inflict any damage. True, they wouldn't make any direct damage, but they can make a very vast and large indirect damage. You should keep in mind, look, it's Israeli sources says that the last night they had about 10 million people, according to some of the sources, in the bunkers. This is not a situation that Israel's economy and country can sustain. In the meantime, Israel has the aerial capability to actually paralyze a part of Iran's strategic industry. And also it brings Iran to the edge of the bankruptcy, which targeting oil refiners. So what I'm trying to say is that, first of all, they both have the utmost capability, different, but utmost capability in terms of nature, to make the war for the other state a war of alteration, a war of, a death by 1,000 cuts. I think that's one of the deterrence tools for both of them. And then why I said hybrid is that I believe what would happen in an event of full-time war, in event of Israel's retaliation, I'm sorry, and it depends on the size of the retaliation. We either would ended up by a ping-pong kind of a situation that Israel hates Iranian hit back, Israel hates an Iranian hit back. That evidently would lead to the second scenario, a total war. In an event of total war, I think what would happen in the terms of Iran, Iranian would rely on, first, direct attacks. Second, employing whatever that left of the ring of fire. I mean, in a large war, having all of the proxies from the Houthis to Iraqis to Syrians to do whatever they can do. It may not be really damageful to the Israelis, but it can cause IDF to spread its sources to within. In the meantime, I wouldn't be surprised that Iranian would make more maritime destabilizatory actions in Persian Gulf and Red Sea. What I mean by maritime destabilization action is that they may want to pursue, they cannot shut down either the Bab al-Mandab or the Hormuz Strait. They cannot do it. But what they can do is that they disrupt the shipments. That might put or leverage a great deal of pressure on the West, which for them it might be a hope that the West would pressure Israel to come to to de-escalate. These are the options, but the question is that, are they going to happen? What would happen if the United States directly gets involved? What would happen if the United States and the Arab coalition get involved? Those options, the impact of those options has a very direct association with U.S. intervention or lack of intervention, which I believe the United States would intervene.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. And that is where the issue of certain other countries comes in. Like, in theory, if the Egyptians were to move 2 divisions towards Gaza with support elements and declare that enough is enough, even before they fire a shot, everyone will be running to this part of the world, trying to stop that. And that will also impact the Israeli calculus.
Yes.
Right? But that's not happening. It's not happening from the Jordanian side. In fact, last time the Jordanians helped down some of the Iranian missiles. And when the Jordanian foreign minister came to Tehran, he was politely told that Jordan should refrain from doing that because otherwise some of the missiles could even target Amman. Now, years ago, I was doing a program on Iran's options, and Dr. Mohammad Marandi, who I'm sure you know, was on my program. And I asked him about some of Iran's options. This was essentially with reference to the tensions between Iran and the GCC and Saudi Arabia and the rest. And Mr. Marandi said to me that Iran could raise Abu Dhabi to ground in a matter of a few hours. So it seems to me that Iran does have multiple targeting options in terms of what it can do. And if one were to actually go back to the Iranian strategy with the indirect approach, then Iran might do certain things which could have second and third order effects in the region and beyond the region. Now, let me ask you to give me a sense of, now that the shallow ground incursion has begun, how much fight do you think is left in Hezbollah? And when I say that, I'm not talking about there any lack of courage or anything. I'm talking about in terms of the commanders who are left, in terms of the strategies and tactics that they would use to blunt the Israeli incursions. How much fight do you think is left?
That's a very good question. It's a very hard question.
I know, which is why I have you here.
Thank you. I think Hezbollah's capability on tactical level to counter Israel's advancement has been undermined. But in a strategic level, I'm a little bit reluctant to join the campaign of people that think Hezbollah already been paralyzed or neutralized to a great deal. A couple of things we have to unpack. Yes, the leadership being removed. But Hezbollah also, since 1990s, right after Nasrallah takeover, after Abbas Mousavi, tried to adopt a little bit of semi-classical military chain of command. Even you can see in the videos, they were making military salutes and all. They were more prone to use military costume. Meaning, one of the things they adopted the chain of the command. You know, if the U.S. Army is to send a division to Iraq, anywhere, and they have a chain of command till the last soldier who would be the commander of himself and the division. They have a chain of command. Hezbollah has, and Hezbollah had successions in plan. For instance, for the Nasrallah, it was more than about 2 decades that they were actually grooming Hashem Safieddin, which it seems to be most likely the next successor. As Nasrallah's cousin, very well connected to the Iranian, father-in-law of the Commander Soleimani's daughter. So there were people in place. And actually, one of them, if there was one of the few smart things that Hezbollah did in terms of counter-espionage and intelligence, was that after the October 7, they did their best that Safieddin and Nasrallah are not in the same room. And that's why Safieddin for now is alive. So I think the commanders will be replaced. And I think Hezbollah actually has the option of the temporary remedies. They can bring the Syrians and Iranians or Iraqis to fill the void in terms of officer level. In past, it happened. IRGC commanders on and off actually led the combat units, especially in earlier stages. And we should keep in mind, many of the IRGC, not many, a number of them, has actually family relations with the body of the Hezbollah. It wasn't only the Soleimani's.
Just a clarification, Arman. So when you say the IRGC officers, are these IRGC officers also familiar with the nuances of Lebanese politics? Because Hezbollah, as we know, is not just a military force, it's also a political force. And it has a cultural impact also in parts of Lebanon. So would these IRGC officers be so much familiar with the context in which they would be leading these?
They are not they are not familiar with they are not really professionally familiar with the politics of the Lebanon in a general context, how to deal with the others. They may not be really familiar with the statesmanship in the Lebanon. I think I'm quite confident on both of those. But what they really need to be familiar is to be familiar with the Hezbollah's military structure for the short term, because we are talking about short-term remedy. It's not a long-term solution.
Right.
They've been on and off working with the Hezbollah troops. They've been working with Hezbollah troops in Syria. Many of them have, like Soleimani, have actually family relations with the border party of the Hezbollahs. Their son, their daughters married to each other. Many of them actually might have went to the same schools. As we know, for instance, Mr. Safieddin, who is probably Nasrullah's successor, he first was educated in Najaf, then in Qom. So between the military bonds and putting in a general speaking, the Hezbollah's leadership and IRGC's and Iran's intelligence sphere, there is quite a good bond that in a short term can help them. But in a long term, it can actually have a backlash. Mm-hmm. So if they have these people in long term to long run for a long run around the Hezbollah, it might severely undermine Hezbollah's domestic political presence or influence in Lebanon, because then would be a foreign asset.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you are also an expert in Russian affairs. So let me ask you two quick questions before I wrap up this program.
Sure.
One is that Russia is fairly dependent on Iran for some weapon platforms like these direct attack munitions and loitering munitions of the drones. And so, for Russia to sort of see Iran or Iranian capability being degraded to a point where Iran becomes useless in a manner of speaking for Russia is something that the Kremlin is unlikely to be very happy about, if you know what I mean. So what do you think would Russia's approach be to this kind of scenario? And the supplementary question is that, seen from another perspective, if the United States gets bogged down in the Middle East, that basically clears up a lot of space for Russia in terms of what it is doing in Ukraine. So there is both a disadvantage for Russia as well as an advantage, depending on what perspective one is bringing to the table.
Very good questions. Very important questions. As all you're crushing it. Let's start with the first one. Look, since the Gorbachev, actually it's not since the Russian Federation, since the late years of the Soviet Union, when Gorbachev came up with this whole new thinking idea, Russia's foreign policy had a graduate shift in which Russia should not drag itself into the hostility with Israel over the conflict with the third parties. And we know it, for instance, during the Yeltsin, they signed the famous contract with the Bill Clintons, Gore Gramsci with the Clintons administration to not sell Iranian weapons. That was an agreement solely over that. So Russians has been endeavoring while have a friendly relationship, but not having that relationship undermine the relations with Israel, because they have a quite prosperous. They used to have at least a quite prosperous relations. The Ukraine war changed it to some extent, because now Iranian for the first time have leverage over the Russians. What would be Russia's response? I think Russia would try to make indirect supports to Iranian. What do I mean is that I wouldn't be surprised if Russians are starting sharing intelligence with Iranians, both from the human or satellites. I wouldn't be surprised if similar to the Syria when the Russians launched, as you know, the famous Syrian Express, when they kept sending military cargoes. They tried to send Iran some level of weaponry, but nothing really new or advanced, like, I don't know, advanced level of S-400 or others. I think they would try to assist Iran, but not to the extent that Israelis find or see Russia, and also Arab states. It's not just only Israel. Russia has a lot to lose. Yeah. Russia, for the first time in its history, is maintaining a good relationship with the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. So they will support Iran indirectly, limited, only to an extent to assure the survival of the regime, not Iran winning the war. But regarding the second question, well, I think we should, as you know, first keep in mind the United States military doctrine since World War era has been kind of implemented on US being able on contributing or being in two wars across two different oceans. Well, but having the doctrine is different from enforcing the doctrine. If United States gets dragged into a war in the Middle East, I think Ukraine will be deprioritized. However, would be still a place of attention. But what would happen, I think Europeans probably would take more share of what they can. They wouldn't be able to replace the United States. They would be able to replace, I don't want to exaggerate on downgrade their capability in compared to US, a fraction of the US assistance to Ukraine. But still, the United States would show some sort of support, because the United States has to think the issue in a strategic level. Doesn't want to also send a signal to China in regard to the talk. So there is a lot for the US, keep in mind, to not completely have Ukraine out. But a war in Middle East in a greater level, and having the United States walked into it, or dragging or chain-gaining the United States into it, serves Russia's interest to some extent. Not only over Ukraine, but also we should keep in mind a war in Middle East would disrupt the supply of energy to some extent. It might force many countries. First of all, it increases the price of oil, which serves the Russian interest. And also, I wouldn't be shocked that many Europeans start to kind of flexing their muscle or restriction toward the sanctions against Russia's petrol.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I have always been, and I've written about this also, skeptical about using Europe as a noun which takes a singular verb.
Yeah.
There's Europe, and there's Europe, and there's Europe. And a number of European countries like Hungary, Serbia, Slovenia, Slovakia, I mean, these are countries that really don't want to be part of this anti-Kremlin strategy. So I really don't think that Europe, as it is constituted today, will be able to step up to the plate in the way that obviously the level of support that the United States can give and could maintain over the last 2 years. But I think we are entering a very interesting period with the world, frankly, going to, if I might say so, going to shit. And this, if this goes further south, this particular round, then I think it will have major impact, not just in the region, but across the region. But thank you so much, Arman. It was great having you on the program, and I really enjoyed your insights. And I think for all the wrong reasons, I'd probably get you back on the program, because this situation is likely to, as I said, go further south. And this is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button. It doesn't get me any lucre, but it makes me happy, and it also helps us bring you quality discussions. So until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.